Marcus's hand froze mid-caress on Elena's abdomen. Something moved beneath her surgical bandage, a ripple, deliberate and alive. His breath caught in his throat as he watched the white gauze undulate in the moonlight streaming through their bedroom window. Elena's eyes remained closed, her face a mask of pleasure that suddenly felt performative, rehearsed. The movement came again, more pronounced this time, like fingers pressing from the inside out. His heart hammered against his ribs as ice-cold realization flooded his veins. This wasn't post-surgical swelling. This wasn't normal. The woman beneath him, his wife of 12 years, had bandages covering something that was very much alive. When her eyes finally opened and met his, there was no surprise there. Only a terrible, knowing sadness. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can explain." Elena Marie Castellano was born on August 14, 1988, in Providence, Rhode Island, to a working-class Puerto Rican family that measured a woman's worth in her ability to maintain her man's interest. Her mother, Rosa, had been a beauty queen in San Juan before moving to the mainland, and she raised Elena with one unshakable doctrine: a woman's body was her currency, and depreciation was unforgivable. Marcus James Whitfield, born November 3, 1986, in Hartford, Connecticut, grew up in the opposite environment, a home where his corporate lawyer mother and surgeon father valued achievement and intellect above all else. He met Elena at Brown University, where she worked as an administrative assistant in the English department while he pursued his PhD in literature. She was 23, radiant, with curves that defied the gaunt fashion of the time. He was 25, bookish, and utterly unprepared for the way she laughed, full-throated and unashamed. They married in 2013 in a small ceremony that pleased neither family. His parents thought Elena lacked ambition, hers thought Marcus lacked passion. But for 9 years, they proved everyone wrong. Marcus became an associate professor at Yale. Elena managed their home with the same precision Rosa had taught her, though she'd abandoned her mother's obsession with appearance, or so she thought. The fracture began with silence. After their daughter Sophia was born in 2019, Elena's body changed. Stretch marks silvered across her abdomen like fault lines. Her breasts, once high and firm, surrendered to gravity. She watched Marcus in those early months, cataloging every glance that lingered a half-second less, every touch that felt more obligatory than hungry. He never said anything. Marcus was too kind, too evolved for such shallow concerns. But Elena carried her mother's voice in her head like a second heartbeat. Men don't leave because they stop loving you. They leave because they stop wanting you. By 2025, the silence between them had become a third presence in their marriage. Marcus spent longer hours at the university. Elena spent longer hours at the gym, chasing a body that time and childbirth had irrevocably altered. When she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw herself, she saw a woman being slowly erased. The decision to get the tummy tuck came after she found Marcus's laptop open one evening. She hadn't meant to snoop, but there it was, his browser history, filled with images of women who looked nothing like her anymore. Women with flat stomachs and taut skin. She closed the laptop without confronting him, her hands trembling. That night, she scheduled a consultation with Dr. Benjamin Chen, a plastic surgeon whose Instagram feed promised transformations that bordered on miraculous. Elena's relationship with her body was archaeological, each layer revealing a different era of self-worth. As a child, she'd been chubby, the recipient of Rosa's disapproving sighs and carefully portioned meals. In high school, she'd starved herself into popularity, learned that hunger was a small price for belonging. In her 20s, she'd finally found balance, but that balance was predicated on Marcus's desire for her. Without it, she was unmoored. Marcus, for his part, was genuinely unaware of the crisis unfolding beside him. His distance had nothing to do with Elena's body and everything to do with his own creeping irrelevance. Academia was changing. His specialization in postmodern literature felt increasingly archaic in a world demanding practical skills. His last book had received lukewarm reviews. At 40, he felt himself becoming the kind of man he'd once pitied, going through motions, arriving at conclusions that satisfied no one. He'd started taking longer walks around campus, sitting in coffee shops where young people discussed ideas with the kind of fervor he'd lost. The browser history Elena discovered wasn't about desire, it was about distraction. The women on those screens were as abstract to him as characters in novels, not real enough to want, just real enough to make him forget his own fading relevance. But marriages don't survive on intentions. They survive on perceptions. The Whitfield Castellano household existed in a careful choreography of avoidance. Sophia, now 6, bright-eyed and intuitive, felt the tension even if she couldn't name it. She'd started drawing pictures at school of their family, stick figures standing on opposite ends of the page, never touching. Her teacher mentioned it during a parent conference that only Elena attended. Marcus had a faculty meeting. Elena's decision to get surgery was both calculated and desperate. She'd saved money from her part-time job managing social media for local businesses, work Marcus barely acknowledged as real employment. The surgery cost $8,200, nearly every penny she'd squirreled away over 2 years. She told Marcus it was a minor procedure, just removing some excess skin, no big deal. He'd nodded absently, his mind on a tenure review that might determine whether the university still valued him. Dar. Chen was Korean-American, 50-something, with the kind of gentle confidence that came from thousands of successful procedures. During the consultation, he showed Elena before and after photos that seemed almost doctored in their dramatic transformations. "You have good elasticity," he told her, pressing her abdomen with clinical detachment. "We can definitely give you that pre-pregnancy contour back." What he didn't tell her, what she'd learn only later, was that Dr. Chen was under investigation by the state medical board. That his malpractice insurance had been dropped by 2 carriers. That his success rate had plummeted as his addiction to prescription opioids intensified. That the clinic where he operated was barely skirting health code violations. Elena signed the consent forms without reading them carefully. She was too focused on the future, on the moment Marcus would see her undressed and want her again with that old urgency. She didn't consider that some prices couldn't be calculated in dollars. The surgery took place on a Tuesday morning in late December 2025. Marcus dropped Elena off at the surgical center on his way to campus, kissed her forehead with the same distraction he applied to most of their interactions, and promised to pick her up that afternoon. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and something else, something slightly off, like fruit just beginning to rot. Elena woke in recovery with her midsection wrapped tight as a mummy, pain radiating through her core despite the medication. The nurse, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, helped her dress and provided instructions Elena barely heard through the fog of anesthesia. Keep the dressing dry. No strenuous activity. Follow up in 1 week. Marcus collected her with the solicitousness of a distant relative, settling her into bed at home before retreating to his study. Elena lay in the darkness, her abdomen throbbing with each heartbeat, and wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. But then she imagined Marcus's face when he finally saw the results, imagined his hands exploring her new contours, and the doubt receded. The first sign that something was wrong came that night. A sensation beneath the bandages, not pain exactly, but presence. Like when you feel someone watching you from across a room. Elena pressed her hand against the gauze and felt something. A response. A pressure pushing back. She convinced herself it was post-surgical swelling, normal inflammation. Dr. Chen's instructions mentioned swelling. By Thursday, the sensation had evolved into movement. Subtle at first, a flutter like butterflies. By Friday afternoon, while Sophia was at school and Marcus was teaching, Elena unwrapped a corner of the bandage and looked. Her skin was discolored, purple-yellow bruising that seemed normal enough. But beneath it, she could see something shifting. The skin moved in ways that had nothing to do with muscle or breath. She called Dr. Chen's office. The receptionist put her on hold for 20 minutes before coming back with a message. the doctor says some movement is normal as tissues settle. Keep the area clean and come in for your scheduled follow-up. Elena rewrapped the bandage with shaking hands. She took 2 of the pain pills Dr. Chen had prescribed, pills that made the world soft and the fear manageable. By evening, she'd convinced herself she was overreacting, that her mother's voice in her head was making her paranoid. Marcus came home late that night with takeout Chinese food and the distracted air of a man whose mind was elsewhere. They ate in front of the television, Sophia chattering about her day while her parents offered monosyllabic responses. Marcus didn't ask about the surgery. Elena didn't volunteer information. The silence between them had become so normalized that even a major medical procedure couldn't penetrate it. That night, after Sophia was asleep, Marcus reached for Elena with a hesitancy that felt more like obligation than desire. She'd been waiting for this, had planned for it. She guided his hands away from her bandaged midsection, redirecting him, performing pleasure with an actress's precision. Afterward, he fell asleep quickly, and Elena lay awake feeling the thing beneath her bandages move with increasing insistence. Sunday night. 3 days post-surgery. Marcus initiated sex with unexpected urgency, not passion exactly, but a kind of desperate need to connect that had been absent for months. Elena was unprepared but willing. In the darkened bedroom, with only moonlight illuminating them, she forgot to redirect his hands. His palm slid across her abdomen, over the bandage, and froze. She felt him tense above her, felt the exact moment his arousal transformed into something else. His hand remained motionless on her stomach as, beneath the gauze, something moved. Not a flutter this time but a deliberate, forceful push, like a hand pressing from the inside out. Elena. His voice was barely a whisper, hollow with shock. What was that? It's healing. It's normal. But her voice betrayed her, cracking on the last word. Marcus pulled away, reaching for the bedside lamp. Light flooded the room, harsh and revealing. He stared at her bandaged midsection, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, horror. The bandage moved again, a distinct undulation that no amount of medical explanation could normalize. Take it off, Marcus said. Not a request. A command, delivered in a voice she'd never heard from him before, cold, absolute. Marcus, please, I can't. The doctor said. Take it off. Elena's hands shook as she reached for the edge of the bandage. She unwrapped slowly, each layer revealing more bruised skin, more unnatural movement beneath. When the final layer came away, they both saw it, her abdomen, sutured with crude black stitches, distended slightly, and beneath the skin, clearly visible beneath the skin, something moved with purposeful, articulated motion. It looked like fingers. Small fingers, pressing outward, dragging across the inside of her abdominal wall like someone trapped behind a curtain. Marcus scrambled backward off the bed, his face drained of color. What the fuck is that? Elena, what the fuck is that? Elena started crying, the pain medication and shock and fear finally overwhelming her careful control. I don't know. I don't know. Something's wrong. Something went wrong with the surgery. But even as she said it, she knew it was inadequate. Whatever was moving inside her wasn't a surgical error. It was something else. Something living. Marcus grabbed his phone from the nightstand, his hands trembling so badly he nearly dropped it. I'm calling 911. No. Elena lunged forward, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. Please, Marcus. Just, let me call Dr. Chen first. Let me figure out what this is before we... Before we what? Before the thing inside you does whatever it's trying to do. His eyes were wild, stranger's eyes. This isn't normal. This is fucking insane. The movement beneath her skin intensified, as if responding to their raised voices. They both watched, frozen in horror, as something traced a line across her abdomen from the inside, a distinct shape, deliberate and purposeful. It looked almost like letters. Like something was trying to write on her from within. Elena called Dr. Chen's emergency line at 11:47 p.m. It rang 17 times before going to voicemail. She called again. And again. On the fourth attempt, a man answered, not Dr. Chen, but someone younger, irritated at being woken. Yeah. I need Dr. Chen. This is Elena Castellano. I had surgery on Tuesday and something's very wrong. A long pause. Dr. Chen isn't available right now. I don't care if he's available. Something's moving inside me. Inside the surgical site. I need him to. Listen, lady. The voice was harder now, defensive. Dr. Chen has been, he's not practicing right now. If you have a medical emergency, go to the ER. The line went dead. Marcus was already dressed, keys in hand. We're going. Now. The drive to Yale New Haven Hospital took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Elena sat in the passenger seat, hands pressed against her abdomen, feeling the thing inside her move with increasing agitation. It was responding to her fear, she realized. When she calmed her breathing, the movement decreased. When panic spiked through her, it thrashed. Talk to me, Marcus said, his voice tight. Tell me everything. From the beginning. So she did. The consultation. The surgery. The clinic that smelled wrong. The recovery that felt off from the start. The phone calls that went unanswered. As she spoke, she watched Marcus's hands tighten on the steering wheel, his jaw working with suppressed emotion. You did this to look good for me, he said finally. Not a question. I did this because you stopped seeing me. I never stopped. He cut himself off, eyes on the road. This isn't the time. The ER waiting room was fluorescent bright and half full with the casualties of a Sunday night, drunk college students, a man with a bloody towel wrapped around his hand, a child coughing with pneumonic intensity. Elena checked in, explained her symptoms to a triage nurse whose expression shifted from boredom to concern to alarm as she spoke. They were taken back within 10 minutes. A resident, young, Southeast Asian, exhausted. Examined Elena's abdomen with gentle, clinical touches. His eyes widened when he felt the movement. How long post-op, he asked. 3 days. And your surgeon was? Dr. Benjamin Chen. At Shore Surgical Center. The resident's expression darkened. He excused himself, returned 5 minutes later with an attending physician, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and the kind of authoritative presence that comes from decades of seeing the impossible. Dar. Sarah Brennan introduced herself and examined Elena without preamble. Her face remained carefully neutral as she palpated the surgical site, felt the movement, and studied the crude stitching. Finally, she looked up at Elena and Marcus with an expression that managed to be both compassionate and professionally disturbed. I need to be very direct with you both, she said. This requires immediate surgical intervention. Not tomorrow. Not in an hour. Now. What is it? Elena's voice was barely audible. Dr. Brennan hesitated, choosing her words with visible care. I can't be certain until we operate, but based on what I'm seeing and feeling, and based on your surgeon's name. I believe there's a foreign biological mass that was placed in your abdominal cavity during your tummy tuck. It's living tissue, but it's not yours. The room tilted. Marcus grabbed Elena's hand. The first intentional touch between them in months that had nothing to do with sex or obligation. What kind of tissue? That's what we need to determine. But Mrs. Whitfield, I need to tell you, Dr. Chen is under investigation for several serious violations. One of his patients died 2 weeks ago from post-operative complications. The medical board shut down his practice 3 days ago. 3 days ago. The same day as Elena's surgery. He operated on me knowing he was shut down. Dar. Brennan's silence was answer enough. They prepped Elena for emergency surgery in a blur of consent forms and anesthesia consultations. Marcus held her hand until the orderlies wheeled her away, and for the first time in months, she saw real fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. It wasn't a desire, but it was something better. It was caring that ran deeper than attraction, older than lust. The surgery took 4 hours. Marcus sat in the waiting room drinking bad coffee and thinking about all the ways he'd failed to pay attention. To Elena. To their marriage. To the quiet desperation that drove a woman to put herself on an operating table for his approval he'd thought he was giving simply by staying, by not leaving. He'd confused presence with love, routine with commitment. He thought about his parents, about the way his mother had measured her worth in case wins and his father in successful surgeries. They'd loved each other, he supposed, but in the way colleagues love each other, with respect and partnership but little tenderness. He'd promised himself he'd be different, that he'd marry someone warm and vital, someone who'd teach him to feel rather than simply think. Elena had been that person. When had he stopped learning from her? When Dr. Brennan finally emerged, still in surgical scrubs, her expression was carefully controlled. Marcus stood so quickly he knocked over his coffee cup. "She's stable," Dr. Brennan said first. "She's going to be okay." The relief nearly buckled his knees. And what was inside her? Dr. Brennan gestured to a chair. They both sat. "This is going to be difficult to hear. What we removed was fetal tissue. Approximately 12 weeks of development. Not viable, but preserved somehow, and placed inside her abdominal cavity during the tummy tuck procedure." Marcus's mind went blank, then flooded with questions that crashed over each other. Fetal tissue. You mean, a fetus? Non-viable. It appears to have been preserved, we're not sure how yet. The tissue showed signs of movement due to Elena's own body heat and muscle contractions creating the illusion of independent motion. But Mr. Whitfield, this wasn't an accident. This was deliberately placed inside your wife. The implications rolled over him in nauseating waves. Why would anyone? We don't know. The police have been notified. We're treating this as a criminal matter. Dr. Chen will be located and arrested. We've discovered he's done this to at least 2 other patients. One was the woman who died, the tissue became septic and caused systemic infection. Marcus thought about the thing moving under Elena's skin, thought about his wife lying under anesthesia while a madman put death inside her body, and something cold and absolute settled in his chest. The kind of rage that doesn't explode but compresses, becomes diamond hard and purposeful. "I want to see her," he said. Elena woke in recovery with Marcus beside her bed, holding her hand, his eyes red-rimmed and focused entirely on her face. No phone. No distraction. Just presence, finally, completely. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi." His voice broke on the word. "I'm so sorry. You didn't do this." "I did. Not the physical thing. But everything that led you there. Every time I wasn't fully present. Every glance I didn't give you. Every way I made you feel invisible." Elena squeezed his hand weakly. "I chose this. I chose wrong. We both chose wrong. 4 months. Maybe years." He leaned forward, pressed his forehead against her hand. "But we're going to choose differently now. Starting right now." The transformation wasn't magical or instant. But it was real. In that sterile recovery room, with Elena's abdomen newly sutured by a surgeon who'd saved her life, they both understood what they'd lost and what they might rebuild. Not the marriage they'd had, that was gone, revealed as hollow. But something new, built on truth instead of assumption, attention instead of autopilot. Dr. Benjamin Chen was arrested at a motel in New London, Connecticut, 48 hours after Elena's emergency surgery. The police found him in the midst of what appeared to be a psychotic break, surrounded by medical journals and handwritten manifestos about correcting nature's waste and repurposing the discarded. Marcus read about the arrest in the New Haven Register while Elena recovered at home. The article detailed Chen's descent, a once-respected surgeon who'd begun using opioids after a back injury, whose addiction had cost him his first marriage, his hospital privileges, and eventually his medical license in California before he relocated to Connecticut and started again. His practice had become a refuge for desperate patients willing to accept bargain prices and substandard conditions. But the fetal tissue, that was something else. Chen had been taking tissue from abortion clinics, preserving it with experimental techniques, and implanting it in plastic surgery patients as part of what he called life affirmation therapy in his journals. He believed he was creating a direct connection between women and the lives they might have created, that this would cure what he saw as the epidemic of female self-hatred. It was insane. Sociopathic. And 3 women, including Elena, had nearly died because of his delusion. The criminal trial was scheduled for March 2026. The prosecutor's office reached out to Elena, asked if she'd be willing to testify. She spent 3 days deciding, 3 days during which Marcus sat with her each evening and simply listened, no judgment, no solutions, just presence. "I don't know if I can stand up there and have everyone know what was inside me," Elena said on the 3rd night. They were in bed, not touching sexually but close, their fingers interlaced. "It feels like I've been violated in a way I can't explain." "You were violated. By a man you trusted to heal you. But I chose him. I chose to do this for such stupid reasons." Marcus turned to face her fully. "Your reasons weren't stupid. They were human. You felt invisible, and you tried to become visible again. That's not stupid, it's survival. And yes, you chose wrong. But Chen chose to be a monster. That's on him, not you." Elena's eyes filled. "Will you come to the trial? If I testify? Every day. Front row." The decision to testify was its own transformation. Elena had spent so much of her life making herself smaller, acceptable, palatable. Standing in a courtroom and telling her truth, ugly, violated, angry, would be the opposite of that. It would be taking up space. Demanding to be seen not as she wished she were, but as she actually was. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Marcus took leave from the university and sat in the courtroom every day, watching Elena transform from victim to survivor to witness. She testified on day 7, wearing a navy suit and no makeup, her hair pulled back severely, every soft part of her armored. The prosecutor, a woman named Jennifer Wallace, guided Elena through her testimony with clinical precision. The surgical decision. The procedure. The recovery. The discovery. Elena's voice remained steady until she described the moment Marcus's hand felt the movement, the moment her violation became undeniable and shared. "What did you think was inside you?" Wallace asked. "I didn't let myself think about it completely. But somewhere, I knew it was something that shouldn't be there. Something alive that was also dead. Something Dr. Chen had put inside me without consent." The defense attorney, a gray-suited man who looked deeply uncomfortable with his client, cross-examined with unusual gentleness. "Mrs. Whitfield, you signed consent forms for the surgery, correct?" "Yes." "And those forms included language about potential complications?" "They did. But they didn't mention the intentional implantation of foreign biological tissue. They didn't mention that my surgeon was practicing illegally. They didn't mention that he was using my body as an experiment for his delusional theories about women's psychology." Elena's voice rose in the last sentence, months of suppressed rage finally finding expression. The courtroom was silent. Even the defense attorney looked moved. Dr. Chen himself sat at the defense table looking somehow smaller than his mugshot, his shoulders collapsed inward, his eyes unfocused. He'd been deemed competent to stand trial, but barely. His addiction and mental deterioration had accelerated in custody. When Elena finished testifying, she walked past the defense table. Chen looked up, met her eyes, and said something so quietly that only she heard it, "I was trying to help you." Elena stopped. Turned. The bailiff moved forward, but she held up a hand. She walked back to the defense table and leaned down until her face was inches from Chen's. "You put death inside me," she said, her voice perfectly controlled. "You took my body, my choice, my autonomy, my safety, and you violated all of it for your sick fantasy about saving women from ourselves. You didn't help me. You tried to kill me. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure everyone knows what you are." Chen's eyes filled with tears, but Elena felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity. Just a clean, clear hatred that she would carry forever, and that was okay. Some things should be hated. Some violations demand permanent rage. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Chen guilty on all counts. Assault, battery, practicing medicine without a license, reckless endangerment, and 3 counts of attempted manslaughter. He was sentenced to 23 years in prison. He would die there, alone, unmourned. Elena's physical recovery took 3 months. The psychological recovery would take longer, perhaps forever. She started therapy with a woman who specialized in medical trauma and bodily autonomy violations. She learned that healing wasn't linear, that some nights she would wake up feeling the phantom movement in her abdomen, that the violation would live in her body memory even after the physical evidence was removed and healed. Marcus attended couples therapy with her. They dissected their marriage with the same careful attention they'd failed to apply when it mattered most. They talked about resentment and assumption, about the ways they'd both chosen silence over confrontation, about how they'd confused routine with intimacy. "I need to know if you can stay," Elena said in one session, 6 weeks post-trial. "Not out of obligation or guilt, but because you want to. Because you see me, the actual me, not the me you imagine or wish I were, and choose me anyway." Marcus had sat with that question for a long time. "I see you," he said finally. "I see you trying to be brave even when you're terrified. I see you being strong in ways I never had to learn. I see you dealing with a violation I can't even fully understand. And yes, I choose you. Not the idea of you. Not the version of you I met 15 years ago. You, now, as you are." It wasn't poetry. It wasn't even particularly romantic. But it was truth, and truth was what they'd been missing. They told Sophia age-appropriate versions of what happened. That mommy had been hurt by a bad doctor but was getting better. That sometimes people we trust make bad choices. That her parents were learning to be better partners to each other. Sophia absorbed this with the resilience of children. Though her drawings changed, the stick figures started standing closer together, holding hands. Elena never got another cosmetic surgery. Her abdomen bore new scars now, the emergency surgery marks crisscrossing the original incision. She looked at them sometimes and felt something complicated, not quite pride, not quite acceptance. They were evidence. Proof of survival. She quit her social media job and went back to school at 37, pursuing a degree in social work with a focus on medical advocacy. If she'd been more informed, more empowered, she might have caught the warning signs about Chen earlier. She would spend the rest of her career making sure other women had the information she'd lacked. Marcus published a book, not about postmodernism but about attention, presence, and the ways we fail the people we love through simple negligence. It was more personal than anything he'd written before, more vulnerable. The reviews were strong. His colleagues found it surprisingly moving. But the people who mattered most were the readers who wrote to him about their own marriages, their own failures of attention, their own desperate attempts to reconnect before it was too late. Elena sat in their backyard on a Saturday afternoon in August 2026, 8 months after the surgery, watching Sophia draw with chalk on the patio. Marcus was grilling vegetables, something he'd taken up as a meditative practice, a way to slow down and focus on simple tasks. The air smelled of summer and charcoal and normalcy. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, so desperate to be desired that she'd literally put her life at risk. She thought about the thing that had been placed inside her, the violation that had seemed unbearable and was now simply part of her history. She thought about how close she'd come to death, and how death had taught her to live more deliberately. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair beside her. "How strange it is," Elena said slowly, "that the worst thing that ever happened to me also saved us." Marcus nodded. "Not the worst thing. Chen. Chen was the worst thing. But what happened after, us finally seeing each other, that's what saved us." Semantics. Important semantics. Elena smiled. It felt earned, not performed. Fair enough. Sophia ran over, her hand stained with chalk dust, and climbed into Elena's lap without hesitation. Elena wrapped her arms around her daughter and felt the solid, real weight of her, alive, healthy, hers. This body that had been violated had also created this child. Had survived what should have killed it. Was stronger than she'd ever given it credit for. "I love my body," Elena said suddenly, surprising herself. Marcus looked at her. Yeah. Not because it's beautiful or perfect or looks how society says it should. I love it because it's mine. Because it survived. Because it fought off infection and healed and kept me alive so I could be here right now." She kissed the top of Sophia's head. "That's worth more than flat abs." "Much more," Marcus agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as the afternoon stretched toward evening. There would be hard days ahead. Elena's trauma didn't vanish because she'd gained perspective. Marcus would sometimes still retreat into his head, and Elena would sometimes still feel invisible. But they had tools now. Therapy. Communication. A shared commitment to showing up for each other even when it was uncomfortable. The scars on Elena's abdomen would never fully fade. She would carry them forever, a map of violation and survival written on her skin. But she'd learned something that would have seemed impossible 9 months ago: scars were not failures. They were proof that the body knew how to heal itself. That survival was possible. That some wounds, properly tended, became sources of strength rather than shame. Would you stay in a marriage where you become invisible? Would you risk your life to be seen again? And if you survived something like Elena's violation, how would it change the way you see yourself, your body, your worth? These aren't easy questions, and there are no perfect answers. But Elena's story reminds us that sometimes the worst violations can crack us open in ways that allow light to enter. That the body is more resilient than we imagine. That real love isn't about desire, it's about attention, presence, and the daily choice to see and be seen. What would you have done in Elena's position? Would you have testified, faced your violator in court, demanded justice even when it required reliving trauma? Or would you have stayed silent, let others carry the burden of confronting evil? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that survival is possible, that violations don't define us, that our bodies are capable of extraordinary resilience. And if you want more stories about survival, transformation, and the complicated work of staying human in an inhumane world, subscribe. Because we're just getting started. The scars we carry tell stories. Elena's tells a story of violation and survival, of misguided choices and hard-won wisdom. What story do your scars tell? And more importantly, are you brave enough to share it?